Now, what do we mean by accountability? And an obligation to report, explain, and be answerable to our actions. But all the NGOs, all the agencies are so much reporting, explain so much. I've been for the last 2 days, we've been trying to explain and to be answerable to our action. We can see it as well, accountability as a responsible engagement, but most of us also are so much committed, and activism engagement is one of a very strong value we cherish. Have we been irresponsible for all these years? Why are we talking about accountability now? Then the other way is to say we're accountable to someone or somebody. And definitely, as I mentioned, we're accountable to our mission, our vision and values. But sometimes with the same value, we have opposite direction in our action. We're definitely accountable to institutional donors and indirectly sometimes with their political agenda. And we've discussed over decades about the instrumentalization of humanitarian aid. We would like to reach and give information to the general public, eventually to get some private donors, and we're therefore directly also reaching at them through the media. We're accountable to the media as well. We're accountable for evidence-based practices. Quality has to be in the center of our action. But also we may be accountable to our inner peace, stability. And we're saying so much that innovation is part of what we're doing, but if we look at our governance, we're very conservative. And probably we're, as a human beings, systems are also resistant to change, and we may be some accountability towards that. Now, the neglected person, people, we're going to talk about today is definitely the affected people and communities. And why this is important? Also that they have the right to be heard. They have the right to express. They have the right to be organized. They have the right to participate and negotiate for change, for the change of their society, but the change of our world. At the opening statement of when they had the invitation, there was this quote saying that we need to put the individual human being back at the heart of our work. See the patient rather than the disease, hear the story rather than the statistics. Well, of course, how come we are, working so much on for human beings, for dignity of human beings, and how come it's been slippery, maybe into the not being part of the heart of our work? And then how we talk about these affected communities. I've met so many people that use different wording for the same people with different levels of being a bit more recipient or being more active recognition of your right. And whatever terms we use, I think that definitely we have to be interested in them and what they have to think. I like, the patient, which comes more in the biomedical world. If you look at the etymology from the Latin patiens, patiens means the one who suffers. And today, what I like about the patient too is when you go to the emergency room or you're in a middle income country, you have to be very patient to have access to health care. Now, today, we will have speakers that will talk about this spectrum of interest. We will have Bonaventure Sokpoh, which is working with the core Humanitarian Standard Alliance. His background is agroeconomics and rural development, but he's been touching a lot of spheres and domains in the practices. So we'll be very pleased to hear from him. Wale Osofisan, which is a Deputy Director of the Governance Technical Unit at the International Rescue Committee, that is also been a technical advisor for a lot of organizations before, is an expert in context analysis, and we'll be hearing from him. And we're also pleased to have Shama, which is a Deputy Regional Director for Programs and Organizational Development, Community World Service, Asia. You may be noticed, and some of you would say, it's a nice panel, it's a nice ending, but how come in the panel there's nobody from beneficiary or people from recipient? Then I will give you some videos, or offer you some videos about the person, so we'll try to make a link with them. But I invite you also to look at yourself, and myself and yourself have been all living through some time through a situation of distress, situation of vulnerability, and we've been helped, we've been receiving help. And I'm suggesting that all of us are, in a way, should have an experience with that. And I think through the lens of your own trajectory have been helped, I think you have to listen to this important aspect of accountability. So the directions of helping others is like also you've been helped by others. I know some of you are part of the medical school, and so social accountability is not so new. In 2010, a group interested in litigation made a consensus, and they're trying to spread the idea to bring all this concept of social accountability into the school. And last year, the students themselves, with the International Federation of Medical Students Association, gathered a toolkit so you can evaluate your own faculty and also to see if you can make some changes in the way you receive education to be better accountable, to better address priority concerns of the community you have about to serve. Let me then switch here to the video about some people that have been
I am Kamal Ahmed Alawami and I live in Savan. I personally have not been in contact with any NGO or donors, but I hope to reach them in any way so that I can inform them about our condition and what we are suffering from. But I believe that won't happen until the donor or whoever represents them will visit us in our neighborhood or village so that we can have direct contact with them. It's important to have direct communication so that we can properly convey what we are really suffering. We are in need of medications since we are suffering from fatigue, diseases and hunger. Therefore, our wish would be that the donors or who acts on their behalf comes and visits the needy population personally and sees with their own eyes how the situation is.
My name is Malu. I am from Kunhar village, Umarkot, Sindh province, Pakistan. There are many organizations working in our village on different areas. They continuously involve us in all the activities of the project through which we learn a lot. As a traditional birth attendant, I requested one of the organizations to train all the TBAs in the area on safer delivery practices in the village. Gladly they listened to us and gave us the opportunity to learn further. We are now skilled to handle critical situations. We are aware of pre-delivery signs and other safer methods to handle deliveries.
My name is Obaidullah. I work as a cashier in the Surkhagan refugee camp in Kargi district. I'm a representative of the community as well. Though the local government has not yet helped us much, some organizations have provided support and assistance in the area. To avoid any error in the planning process, the NGO working here has positively taken feedback on opinions and experiences of the community members. The team has coordinated project deliverables with the Shura and elders of the community. Locations for constructing the delivery rooms and water wells were decided in joint meetings with the community members and project teams. To ensure accountability and transparency, the NGO has always encouraged us to regularly monitor the construction and implementation process and provide feedback in order to improve the work.
اگر تو جنا راضی بی تو بیجیه کی تو چهود بیجیه
خدي كي ما يدي ناس تدانينا هاتو ناس يتبردني قالوا اي ناس كم يكيد الناس نا كان بدر
يعني اگر تو نانی آسی تو بیجیه کی دید نو بیجیه مدیر مرکزی
بله بام بيجينا تشمرات بيسنا خدمات اشمار ناكان
از مثلا وقت از چما في مستشفى از بجيب اف درماني منينه بجي افنينا بيجيش قرا خارجي بكره وسالت بري يعني درماني وانت قنجبون دانا خلقي ما تشتغنينا
وتجارك يقولي وتقولي كي
از بجمع تختور بجي اف درماني تبجيل با منينا
دي راضي
امر الماشين ونقنجن بس خدمات كين يعني خدمات سونانينا تختوري دنانانينا ابي ولادانينا على ما بلانغازا يعني كلها تشد كي من مش نتا
هم تجارك افنا راضي بنا خو جهان دي كي وتشوا جهان دي
وديش غير وقت جيس بس ما نكريا تشتك يعني قال لك تشتك كي من مش نتا راس مراجعه قنجه وتختور الماشين خدمات يعني قيمه كي او لازم ابشي بروح مستشفى قريبه 5000 كامبيا شادرة عالم بكردة شو عالم فقير ونازح.
Where should I go?
اسمي منى إبراهيم أحمد الجمل. مكان إقامتي أو سكني مدينة العمال سعوان.
My name is Mona Ibrahim Ahmed Al-Jamal. I live in the city Savan, but I am originally from Hodeidah. I did come to know about the health center through the community volunteers who came to our neighborhood to hold education sessions, and also through the services provided by health center, where free medicine is provided with good services, along with PHC and pregnant care. These services were held by the doctors working in the health center or by the community workers. We don't know how to connect with the donor or anyone who could connect us to the donors, because the donor have never come to visit us or provided us anything. All what we know about the donors is through the health center. We want the donors to come and visit us and to understand our neighborhoods and population's needs. But we don't have the means or the methods that we can reach out to the donors, and we actually don't have a system that can connect us to them. We can provide the intermediate people with our feedback, which can then be passed on to the donors or to the volunteer communities. Only this way we can communicate our needs better, like medications and other things we require for the health center.
Okay. Thank you for your attention. I know it's been difficult, but it's been a creative or way to bring closer. But I think you have seen a lot of videos. Most of you also are from the field, so you know a bit what it is like to be in contact with the affected communities and people. So now we have every presenter will come to have a short presentation of 5 to 7 minutes. So I invite our panelist Shama to address a few words.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to focus more on the application side of accountability, to kind of see how we're applying it in practice, particularly in relation to engagement with the communities that we work with and how we engage with them and ensure their participation in more meaningful ways. So I'm going to focus more at the organizational level changes that I think are needed. I think currently to the humanitarian sector, there are so many different quality and accountability standards available. We have lots of code of conducts, we have standards, we have different initiatives that we are using as a sector to respond to emergencies. And I think in many cases, they've really changed the way we respond to emergencies and respond to the needs of communities, and maybe even better in many ways. But at the same time, I think this conference has provided an opportunity to remind ourselves and to raise key questions about whether we're doing enough in practice to ensure accountability to the people we serve? I think over the last few days, some very key questions have been raised. So my main question is that, is the application of accountability, the standards, are they resulting in changes at behavior and attitudinal level in organizations, within organizations and between organizations? Is it resulting in changes in mindsets? And is it ensuring a more meaningful engagement at the community level and towards their needs? So that's what I'm going to try and focus on. I think that staff behavior and organizational culture, the culture of an organization that are based on accountability principles can go a long way in ensuring more meaningful engagement at the community level and how we engage with them and their participation. Staff, I feel, really need to practice or put into practice what we preach, especially at the community levels. And staff should be able to actually relate accountability to their day-to-day activities and how they implement those activities or how they communicate and engage with the communities. They shouldn't be just principles at kind of the system or policy level. I find that in some organizations or many organizations, we have a tendency to focus more at the system level when it comes to the application of accountability. And we focus a lot on policies. And perhaps maybe it's more tangible to demonstrate it at that level and to report against them at that level. But I really feel there needs to be more effort to ensure it more at the attitudinal and changes in behavior kind of level. And I think that is where we as a sector really struggle and find it really challenging. I think even some organizations that have really strong systems on accountability, even I find they also struggle at times to prevent any misconduct. I think we've been hearing that since yesterday and even today. Even some of the global cases of misconduct and sexual exploitation and abuse that have come about, I think that is also pointing in this direction. At least it's one of the reasons, I think. I really feel that change has to come, or the practice of accountability really needs to come from the leadership in an organization. Leadership and senior managers, they really need to demonstrate accountability in the organization and how they engage with staff, with communities, how decision-making is done in organizations, how authority is delegated, how resources are managed. So at all levels, the leadership has to demonstrate the application. And change comes from the leadership level. I've experienced that in my own organization as well, that when change and commitment comes from the leadership level, the staff then follow by example. They follow role models in the organization and at the community level. So I think I cannot emphasize more on this aspect. I think there are certain aspects that do make this challenging, certain contexts, cultures, and even social conditioning. They do make it difficult to apply the standards at behavioral level. And sometimes I've seen this also in my own team, where managers find it really hard to, for example, demonstrate personal accountability or even hold their own team members accountability. Many times it's in certain cultures, people don't want to go into a confrontational situation. They don't want, or they want their team members to like them. So it gets very difficult to practice accountability at that level. So, and I think another aspect of this is that certain managers actually find it difficult to admit to certain gaps or areas of improvement in their programming or in their activities, which makes learning and continual improvement very hard. And I feel that this is a really important aspect in organization, to learn from our mistakes and to improve on our mistakes so that we can, especially when it comes to community participation and engagement. Otherwise, how can we improve if we don't identify and admit certain areas of gaps? So I think many organizations are committed to accountability and to applying it, but genuinely struggle, I think, to attain the desired level of behavior change in their organization. And I think systematic changes are needed in the organization. And I think like the core humanitarian competency framework can help in this. How many of you have heard about this framework or are familiar with it? Hands up. Okay. So we need to do a lot more work on this. So this framework, it helps to look at core competencies that are needed in an organization to promote a more accountable culture in the organization. So it's applied at sort of the management and HR practices in the organization. So in our own organization, we took this up this year, and we're trying to apply it right from our recruitment to job descriptions to retention and development of our staff to promote a more accountable culture in the organization. Because it also is about attracting and hiring the right people with certain competencies that support this kind of a culture in the organization. Besides this, another important aspect that I would like to highlight, I think the way certain organizations behave with each other, especially during large emergencies, really undermines accountability. I think we ourselves have also experienced it, and other national and local organizations have also experienced this, whereby like in big emergencies, in Asia, the Nepal earthquake or Typhoon Haiyan in Philippines, we experienced that some of the larger northern agencies, they treated some of the local organizations in a very unaccountable manner, especially in the way they try to create monopoly over resources, over sectors, over territories. So I think Ms. Dagan Ali spoke at length on this issue yesterday in her opening statement. And I think that some of the localization initiatives that have come about are in response to this kind of a problem. I think that firstly, this kind of competition, it really draws attention away from the communities who are supposed to be at the heart of a response. And it draws attention more towards some organizations who have their own interests at the forefront. Secondly, I think it also hinders a more localized response, because national and local organizations, I think they're in a better position to ensure a more meaningful engagement and participation of the communities, because they have deep-rooted or more strong relationships with the communities. They have more contextual understanding and knowledge. So I think it really weakens that. And thirdly, I feel that this kind of competition by some organizations makes coordinated community participation mechanisms very challenging, because branding and then visibility, this kind of takes over and takes precedence. So this often results in unmet needs and unmet expectations of the communities. So, I mean, there are also some examples of really good partnerships. I don't want to generalize this. There are also some very good models of like coordinated approaches on community participation. Like there's this community-based complaints response mechanism, the interagency one that is being promoted by the IASC. They have a best practice guide, so do have a look at that. In the 2010 Pakistan floods, we tried to promote more coordinated mechanisms for community participation by collaborating with the Human Rights Commission in Pakistan. They're seen as a more neutral and independent body. So we were able to collaborate with them and set up like district-level complaint response mechanisms and information centers. So this was acceptable to other NGOs and to the communities themselves because they have a lot of credibility. They were able to campaign at the community level directly and also use local radio to engage the communities, to help them get information on the different service providers and what they should expect from service providers, what kind of behavior to expect, what kind of services to expect. And this really helped to strengthen the voice of the communities and address some of their concerns and their needs. So just to conclude, I think at all levels, the emphasis should be on how organizations and people who work in the humanitarian sector behave in a particular context within the workplace, with communities, with partners, and with other stakeholders. And we should really try to emphasize a lot on the behavior change as a result of some of the accountability standards that we apply. Thank you.
So I invite Wale Osofisan.
Right, thanks, Shama. That's a good segue into my own presentation. So to your question of behavioral change, I'll also talk about some of the things we're doing at the IRC. So at the IRC, we have a strategy which we put together in 2015 when David Miliband became the president of the International Rescue Committee. And one of the key strategic objectives of that strategy is responsiveness. And that comes in two parts. One part is client responsiveness and partner responsiveness. Because we work with local partners, we also want to be responsive to the local partners that we work with. We don't want to dictate to them what to do. We want them to inform what we're doing, take joint decisions. Just some conceptual clarity. We deliberately use the terminology client. We don't use beneficiaries because beneficiary connotes lack of agency. Someone is benefiting from something. It deprives them of agency. So we prefer to use clients. There are issues too with, clients as a terminology. Then the second thing is, we're talking about accountability, but sometimes we see accountability as feedback, people giving feedback. So we deliberately talk about responsiveness. So it's not just about receiving feedback, but how are we responding to the feedback that we're getting from our clients. But just to take a step back and ask ourselves, what's the problem the humanitarian community is trying to address in relation to accountability? And in the spirit of the Humanitarian Congress, theory and practice, I guess in theory we all agree that it is incumbent upon us to be accountable to the people we serve. We all agree on that in theory, right? But what's the reality in practice? Are we systematically putting in place mechanisms that creates clear channels for which our clients can meaningfully participate in decision-making processes and hold us to account for the decisions that we make? The reality is, yes, humanitarian organizations engage affected communities. They establish feedback mechanisms in form of, sometimes outlines, suggestion boxes, and some, use some more proactive methods to solicit client feedback. But yet, as I was saying before, this feedback does not necessarily lead to a response, right? There's a suggestion box, they've made suggestions. Are we getting back to the clients to explain to them what we're doing, the decisions that we've taken based on that feedback? So at the IRC, going back to institutional behavioral changes, what we've done is we are focusing on our own internal project management processes and behaviors as well. And we do have what we call the technical assistance model, which all technical advisors, irrespective of the sector, it's a guide for them to follow in project design. And they have to make sure that the intervention is based on the best available evidence, it's appropriate to the context in which we're implementing it, so we prioritize context analysis, and also based on the strong gender analysis, because as an organization, we've made a commitment that all our programs will try to close the gap between men and women and boys and girls. And finally, it has to take into account client preferences during the design phase of the project. So our TAs, irrespective of the sectors, technical advisors, have to make sure that before we submit a proposal, all these boxes are actually checked. Now, we can argue that, yes, that's at the proposal stage. What about implementation? What happens in practice? So we have what we call good and great standards that we've put together. It's a very American, IRC is an American organization, so they've got this very, we have this very interesting terminologies that we use. So by good standards, we are saying on client responsiveness, at the minimum, you have to consult with the clients that you're going to, be providing services to. And that goes all through the project management cycle, right? From startup, to implementation, to monitoring and evaluation, and also to, close out. What we're aiming for is a great standard where we co-design interventions with our clients, but we're not yet there, or not a lot of our country programs are not there. And the other things that we also need to take into account are the enablers, and you touched on some of them, within organizations. But one I really think, actually two, that I really think is so critical to making this, a success is leadership, and you talked about that as well. So at the IRC, we have, as I said, the president is committed to this, and that trickles all the way down to, the regional vice presidents and the country directors and the program managers. And one of the things that we're also exploring is having this as part of the performance management evaluation of, implementers, program managers, and officers working, with the communities, so that the line managers, at the end of the year or on periodic basis can actually follow up to say, are you actually putting these actions into practices? Because you have to create incentive structures for people to change their behavior, right? They're just not going to change their behavior if you don't have, the carrot and stick approach to that. But of course, it's not enough to just say to people that you have to follow these standards, that we've developed. We also have to build their capacity. So capacity building is also very, very important, not just of IRC staff, but also our partners that we work with, for them to understand what the standards are, what the tools that are available, where they are, where they can find them, and where they can get support. So we have what we call client responsiveness team that supports our country programs to take that forward. So I'll stop at that, and I'm sure that we'll have other conversations as we go on.
Thank you. Important question. What is the problem? I'll have your slide. Maybe you stay here as you. I will bring the slide. So I invite Bonaventure, Sokpoh to
the slides will come later. Yes, thank you, and hello to everybody. And when we are talking about accountability, humanitarian accountability, in one of your slides, Nicolas, there was several dimensions of the accountability. I would like to pick 3 of them and talk about that. The first one is accountability to donors, government, all this. And the second one is accountability to affected people, crisis-affected people. And the third one is accountability between peers. How do we prove what we are doing to each other? And the first one, I believe that we have a culture of upward accountability in our sector. I think in several domains that one is working. I will not insist on that. The second one, despite the fact that we are talking about that 30 years ago, we are still struggling with accountability to crisis-affected people. And we will come back to that later on. And the third one is very important to us because we know that several organizations, including donors, international and national organizations, are committing themselves to standards, principles, code of conduct, and how do we prove that what we have committed to, are we applying that? That's something that is very important for us. We are trying to work on it. I would like to share it. I brought this document here because I allowed myself to bring it because we have launched, CHS Alliance have launched this report on Monday this week. It's how change happens in the humanitarian sector. And this report tried to answer this question by analyzing, examining different topics, including participation of crisis-affected people in the humanitarian decision-making processes. And what we have found, one of the elements we have found, we have talked about that, is the fact that we have sufficient standard principles, code of conduct, procedures, policies in place in the humanitarian sector to deliver a quality response. However, we are struggling with the application of this element. And we have seen that the real change happens when the commitments are translated into practice on the ground. So we have identified some positive experiences that are in the report you will access on our website, chsalliance.org. And the other thing I wanted to share with you is the fact that CHS Alliance is working together with its members to apply the core humanitarian standards that have been published in 2015 by CHS Alliance, the Sphere Project, and the group UAD. This, I would like to know how many people knows about the core humanitarian standard on quality and accountability here. Oh, good. I'm glad that you know about that. And so you know that we have 9 commitments on the CHS, and what we are trying to do is to make the organization really applying this commitment. So we have verification. This CHS is voluntary and verifiable. So we are working on the verification process because we believe that once we are verified, we are able to see where we are strong and where we are weak and where we need to put our effort to improve our element. I would like to share with you some verification data. Yeah, we have it here. So now we have more and more organizations are engaging themselves in the verification process. And the result that we have started to teach us some elements. We have some information that we are getting from them. When you look at this is the core humanitarian standard, the flower that we have. You have the 9 commitments here. And when you look at the first chart, you can see that we have the 9 commitments, and we have put together the data that we have from the verification option. We have 4 verification options: self-assessment, peer review, independent verification, and certification. All these processes are based on the same framework, verification framework. So we can combine and look at the trends in the sector. When you look at it, you can see that we have the commitment 4, which is related to participation of the affected people in the humanitarian sector, humanitarian response. And the commitment 5, which has to deal with the complaint mechanism. These 2 are weak in the sector. So we have this trend there. And we can also look at you have some indexes. We have one on the protection against sexual exploitation and abuse. This one also is weak in our data. When we look at the last one, we have key actions and organizational responsibilities. Organizational responsibilities where we can see that policies and procedures are in place. In many cases, you will see that we are good at having policies, but we are weak in putting them into practice. This is what we will like to work on. We know that verification will help us to do that, because that will bring us to 3 elements we can work on. First, in our organizations. Once we know where we are strong, where we are weak, we can work on in the organization, strengthening people and the department in the organization. We can strengthen the organization, and we can also work on the sector to do something by putting organization together. We can see in the data that for some commitments, some organizations are struggling, but others are performing well. So we can put them together and experiences. So we know this one is good for CHS, but to have a clear idea where we are in the sector on accountability, we also think that we need some voices from the affected people to compare with what we have here. And we have started to work together with Grand Two Solutions in Chad by having a survey, a perception survey with questions linked to the 9 commitments. What we have now, the first data that are coming in, we can see that for the commitment 1, for example, we are not very bad. But when you look at the perception from the affected people, commitment 1 is about the appropriateness and the relevance of the response. When we look at the data that we are having from the affected people, it's not that good. They are not so convinced that we are responding to the priority needs. So we need to compare and combine these 2 elements to take decisions and improve ourselves. Before I finish, I would like to come back to 2 elements that one is the attitude that you talk about. A few years ago, I was conducting evaluation in Central African Republic, and I experienced something that I want to share with you. I was in the village evaluating a health program, and I was asking questions. I went to the health center, a very nice, beautiful building, and very well equipped in that small village, a remote village. And I talked to the personnel in the health center. We talked together, and they told me that it's strange because we have constructed this nice health center, but the people are not coming in. They are not consulting us. And before I left the health center, I was taking photos of the building, and then I went to the communities, and I was asking questions about the health center. Is that helping them? And then they said, and one of the people, the chief of the village, a very old man sitting in the community, he said, before we talked, we have seen you taking photo of the building. Please, can you take photo of our frustrations during the process of construction of this health center? We are not proud of it because the attitude that people use in that process was very humiliating. That's why we are not going there. We will stay here and we can die. We don't want to humiliate ourselves again. So that struck me. It struck me as saying that, oh, this is something that is very important, very nice built there, but people are not using it due to the attitude that people use. So I wanted to come back to that. And the second element was from DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, when we were doing a study on participation. And something that was very interesting raised there is they call that cultural access, because they said you as humanitarian actor, you are all the time, you are talking about access, physical access, but it's not enough because we think that you don't have cultural access. We can be there together, but you don't understand our culture. You don't know how we behave. We don't know very well what we want to have. So you need also this cultural access. We need to learn more and take time to understand who they are, what they want, what is their history, what are their future, what they want for their life. So I want just to share these stories with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to throw some questions, and after I'll let the audience participate a little bit. I will stand a bit on a naive side and hearing from what you say, and I mean, you always bring, I think was very important, the aspect of leadership, of human being. You're on the field, you have a connection, and then you learn something directly from the person you're trying to help. But also, you bring us also some mechanism, some standards, some organization. Are we gonna, is there some possible danger to be too technical about, you know, social accountability, like we did with, you know, building capacity, resilience, gender-based? How are we going to solve the problem? If we have the same mechanics, the same way to approaching a problem is to manage well, being very organized. And I'm feeling, or I'm hearing that the problem is not through that, or it might be helpful, but definitely there's something else going on. How are we going to make a sort of more women, men to women, and bring this without being too technical about it? You want to respond to maybe this soft, provocative question?
Yeah, as we started to talk about it as an attitude, this thing that we will call soft skills, we believe that we need the technical skills, because if you don't know it, we won't construct the well, we won't provide food and all these things. But something that is very important, as I was saying, that, and we have started to look at it very carefully. What are the skills of the people at the front line? The soft skill, the facilitation skill, the negotiation skills, the attitude that they have. Are they aware about the culture, not to behavior in a way that you will shock people? All these things are very important to build the trust between you and the affected people, because we know that in some places, when you arrive and then they propose water to you, and then you say, no, this water is not filtered, or it's not bottled water, I don't want to eat. The fact that you refuse to take something from them will make them a little bit shocked. So we need to take, these are very small things that are playing a very important role in the relationship that we have with affected. We need to take that into account. We have seen that some organizations now are paying attention in the recruitment process to this kind of soft skill, and
choosing the right people with personal qualities. Shama, you want to?
Yeah, I think what you're expressing also could be a genuine concern, because I think we do have to find a balance between the technical side and kind of the soft side, and not become so technical that it becomes difficult for organizations to apply these kind of changes or achieve behavioral change. But I think, like the framework, it does offer, like it says, it's a framework that we can kind of understand the context within our organizations and identify what we want to change. At the same time, I think what could really help was to gather more evidences, especially from organizations that are operating in the field. What are some of the best practices? What are some of the things, evidences of achieving the desired level of behavioral change? So I think more needs to be done from this aspect, and based on some of the practical learnings at the field level.
Yeah.
I always say to my colleagues that in this sector, you know, the aid sector, we try to solve complex problems by developing tools. You know, we keep developing tools. There's a problem, there's another tool, you know, to solve that problem. So, I mean, I agree with you both that the soft skills are so important, and understanding of the local culture. And it goes back to, a related question about staffing as well, right? I've had experiences, not with IRC. IRC is my third INGO, but previous organizations, where we send expert staff to work in communities that they have absolutely no idea, you know, what the culture of the people are. So I visit this community We are planning a focus group discussion, and the team, led by an expert, had set up a high table, and all the clients were sitting on the floor. And to me, like, already you are creating, a skewed power dynamic there. So I said, no, we're all going to sit on the floor. So everyone was on the floor, and we had a better conversation with the community because it was, at the same level, eye to eye, at that point. Then the other thing that I also think that we kind of struggle with, and it'll be good, to hear, your thoughts on this is, how do you build the capacity of people to have those right soft skills, right? So if you cannot get local staff from that community because they probably don't have the technical expertise and it will take a very long time to get them up to speed, how do you build the soft skills of people not from that community to be able to function appropriately in that community? How do you go about that?
You hope they have a good mother and father. In a way, I mean, it's at every level. It's the quality of a human being, but especially, I guess, in an environment where the parenting is very difficult, then you may suffer in some ways. And but you talk a lot about the communities level and people, the frontline. What about hearing the voices of the affected people who the clients at higher levels of the governance of the humanitarian system? How do you think we should, and I do think there's some commitment to bring these voices, and once again there's a complexity to the voices as a refugee, a drug user, HIV affected patient, or sex workers, whatever the complexity of they have their own voice maybe of where they live or what they have been encountered. But how are we going to manage to bring the voices to higher levels? And of course, it's great to have a good interaction with the community, but I guess it has to climb a bit up a upper level. What's your thoughts about that?
Okay, let me go first. So I do have a problem with this idea that the community is a homogeneous entity, right? So, we've spoken to the community. But the question is, who are you speaking to in the community, right? Because you can speak to A today and they tell you these are what our needs are, right? You speak to B tomorrow, they tell you something else entirely. So I think we need to move away from this idea that the community is one and the same. Everyone in the community wants the same thing, because that's not true. Now, to your question about elevating the voices of people below to decision makers above, one of the things that we do, this is a bit different from client responsiveness, but it's social accountability, right? So we have a methodology, which I'm sure, are we familiar with community scorecard? Is anyone here familiar with the community scorecard methodology? Okay, just a few people. So this is a methodology whereby we work with members of the community, right, making sure that we capture the voices of various social groups in the community after doing our context analysis to know what the various social groups are, the minority groups, the women groups and all that. And we facilitate a session where they hold to account their service providers. So for example, it might be a health center or a school. And what we do is, we do that in multiple communities within a district, right? And we aggregate what we're finding. Because if you're going to talk to the district health authority, for example, about a problem in the district, the likelihood of them taking you seriously or listening to you if you're bringing an issue in one particular health center is slim. But if you bring evidence that, look, in your district, in about 15, 16, 17 health centers, you have this particular problem. So it's a common problem within your district. And this is the evidence based on the community scorecard that we've put together. So that gives you more muscle to do advocacy at the higher levels of government. And you can also aggregate that, multiple districts up to a province level, multiple provinces up to the national level. So that's one way to do that.
it's still, I think the measure indicators definitely helps advocacy, but probably the advocacy will be better if the persons themselves, the community will be on the district level. So how do we help them or to get there? What do you think? And I think it's one of the quality and accountability, and as a matter of quality, what we measure, and what your thoughts about it?
I think any work that we do to serve communities, all the approaches that we use should be empowering, and they should have sustainable outcomes. Because I think at the community level, definitely it's not a homogeneous group, but there is great potential within certain community members to be a voice for their own communities. All the time, I think we don't need to be their voice all the time. We should develop them in a way that they can be their own voice and their own agency. For example, in Pakistan, in certain areas when we work with communities, we try to build and support and strengthen pre-existing community structures that can take a stronger role in managing the project, in decision-making, and we particularly pay attention to ensuring that certain different groups are part of that, especially like women, for example. So in one of the areas that we were working, we saw such a transformation in the empowerment of women, for instance, because they got this platform at the village level, at the community level, and then at the district level as well, where they could participate in decision-making. They got so much confidence where they could articulate and share what their issues were. And actually, one of the women, although she was illiterate, she then ran for the local councillor elections, and she became a woman councillor at the district level. So when you see stories like this, I think it just proves that there are capacities at the community level. It's just about providing an enabling environment and providing a platform and supporting those existing structures at the community level.
Just to add on that, the existing structure of the committee is playing a very important role in that, because I've seen, I had in Liberia, for example, we went to a community. We wanted to know about what are the needs, and then when we arrived, the chief said, "Yo, just talk to me. I know my community. I will tell you everything that they need." And we said, no, this is not the way we plan to do it. We have a kind of procedure. We want to talk to everybody. We will have different discussions. We talk to young people for education, women, and different people. And then we ask them to come and feedback what they have discussed publicly. And then the chief said afterwards, say, "Oh, now I can see that it's very important to empower all this category of my community, because if you have accepted to stay with me, and then we discuss, I don't know what the women are saying. I'm surprised, and I can see that there are capacities. They are saying that they can construct a part of the road by themselves. They have tools. So he was surprised. So who to talk to is something that is very important, and how do we identify the community structure and to be right to who we are talking about is something that is very important. I wanted to talk about something else, which is what is the level we are expecting people to be to take decision. One of the elements in our report, and Humanitarian Accountability report this year, is to say that if you want the change to happen correctly, you need to clarify the boundaries. So saying, if we are saying that we want affected people, the crisis-affected people, to take decision at the local level, or at the district, or nationally, we need to be clear on that. We are not yet very clear on this element too, where they have to take decision together with us. So we also need to work on that.
Maybe I'll ask the audience if you have any questions. I see there's a microphone, how it works. There's somebody here in the front row. All right. Just present yourself so the people watching on the video will know.
Yes, my name is Jeroen Jansen. I normally represent MSF, but this is my personal opinion, just to make sure. I have a comment and I have a question. I think the first comment is this. I think we're not going to move anywhere if we keep talking about accountability too, like this voluntary thing that we choose as an organization, who are we accountable to? If you look in a dictionary what accountability means, it says you're being held accountable. There is somebody in power there, and other, that can hold you accountable. I think the whole sector is not going to move anywhere if we're not willing to transfer some power, preferably to those in need, so that it can hold us accountable without any choosing, without any cherry picking, and we don't have choices. I think that would be a good part. Now the question is following. If you want to be accountable, I think transparency is also very important. And what I continuously notice is that with the CHS, both the verification process and the certification process, the reports are not published. So all these organizations that are nicely verified or certified can choose which summary they publish. The report is not published. The details not. We don't know how they've been verified, how they've been certified. It's not published. I think that is also something we have to work on. So my question is, why? Why are these reports not published?
You want to answer?
Yes, I like the element of being held accountable. Yeah. So you said the reports are not public, but you said that the summary of the report are public for the certification and independent verification. If you go to the website of HQI, which is conducting this kind of verification, you will see for all of the organization, you will see their level of performance, not the details. I agree, but not the detail, but the summary is published. So it is something that we can, it's an appeal we can launch, because the organization conducting this kind of verification, they are not allowed to publish. The organizations themselves can take the decision to publish the details if they want to. We are not allowed to do that because it's not our data. So we cannot do that, but the organization themselves, we can try to hold them accountable, and they can publish that. Just my response to that.
When you're not held so much, you probably have too much freedom. That's probably the problem we have. The humanitarian system has too much freedom to decide, cherry picking to do, and then we pile maybe the social accountability as another aspect. But how we need to totally transform and yes, lose a lot of freedom, and then bring the power where it is. But I think there's it's been the opening of this session here in Berlin to bring down the power elsewhere with the money that comes with it. But I think your comment is well received. Some other want to comment?
I just want to pick on your first comment on power dynamics. It's a reality, right? The reality is, who pays the piper dictates the tune. That's just the reality. We talk about being accountable to affected population, and it's a choice. It's a deliberate choice because it's the right thing to do, right? It's the ethical thing to do. It's the moral thing to do. But this is my own personal opinion, right? So I actually think that we need to find a way of developing a form of social contract between aid agencies and the people we serve. What that looks like, I have no idea, but it's something that needs to happen. Because I live in London, right? At the end of every month, I see my paycheck, I see my payslip, I see the taxes I've paid, like most of us here, which makes you a stakeholder, which means you can hold the government to account, right? But the people we serve, the clients, it's not like they've put in money that we're now then, spending to provide services to them. We're getting that money from above. You talked about upward accountability. Yes, because who gives you the money, automatically you have to account for that money. That money is not coming from below, right? So what kind of system, this is a question that I think we need to think about in this industry. What kind of social contracts can we develop that will be actually, that will have teeth?
I know you want to answer, but you will be ready, but I want 2 other questions from the audience. Go ahead. You have to give him the microphone.
Thank you to the panel. I'm Tina and I'm from ICSE. And I have a question regarding non-action. So over the last 2 weeks, we had to learn that the Aquarius is no longer able to operate because it doesn't have a flag anymore. And therefore, there's no testimony or no one who can actually say what's happening on the Mediterranean. And I was wondering, because I was really struck by the silence and the non-solidarity of other organizations and UN agencies towards this particular issue. And most of the times what we heard was that the reason for it is that it's not their mandate. And I was wondering, how can we ensure that humanitarian organizations are accountable to the humanitarian endeavor in terms of to their, to humanity, because it's not only about accountability too, but I think it's really about accountability to humanity, because that's in the end what we should be working for. So my question is, in how far can we address non-action, and can we address that we should not hide behind our mandate so that we are accountable to, real accountable? Thank you.
I don't know if you were there at the session during lunch time. There was a sort of a statement about some kind of failure of UN to deliver what we think is appropriate, and maybe we're all suffering. But you see, the system has maybe too much freedom and not enough laws maybe to conduct and have that in mind. Do you have to respond to what this?
Honestly, I wasn't sure about the question. Was it about UNRWA?
In Mediterranean,
No, my question is, in how far? Because we always have frameworks about how we can get accountability, or how we can achieve more accountability towards the people we work for. But this is always taking place in action. But what about in non-action?
Upper levels. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So in cases where nothing is happening.
Yeah, in cases where humanitarian agencies or actors don't operate. So in terms of how do they set their programs and how do they prioritize their programs?
Being accountable with non-actions.
Yeah.
The question is very interesting. I don't have the answer, but I will just share a couple of views. Even in the area where the crisis happened, we are selecting people we are working for. For example, you have several villages, and you will select some villages. And it's very hard to go back to those who have not selected. What we have usually is you go and you assess all the villages. You come back to your office and you have your criteria, and you say that now I have fund for 10 villages out of 100, and I will go to this one. And we are not going back or explaining why we have selected these villages and not the others. And we have also seen, in my previous life, I was an evaluator, as I said, and I have asked in my process of evaluation to go and talk to non-beneficiaries or those who are not working with. And every time I go there, the reaction was very, very strong from these people, saying that we have been assessed, we have been involved, we had the expectation. Nobody came here and explained why not. So I think this is a very good question. And I'm talking only about an area where you are intervening, and then there are several villages where we are not intervening. And the question is much bigger when you have a crisis where you are not even intervening. So, but here I don't have that answer. I think we need to go back and when we explain, and people know us and know how we access resources, or the amount of resources that we have, the constraints that we have, why are we selecting this, the criteria we share that with them in an area they can understand. But
social accountability is a new way to shout about humanity suffering when justice has failed, in a way, and how are we going to stop that? And I mean, there's a failure in the system if we come now to be socially accountable. And we'll take the last questions. I don't want to, because it's 5, maybe another one. I don't know how flexible is the organization. About a few minutes, but go ahead.
Hi. My name is Elias. I'm currently taking a master's in disaster management. And I would like to stress on the aspect of transparency, because I think accountability, also on the slide before, there was this box that says public. And I feel like, and coming back to the very, very first session about dignity, it's a choice. Also having a choice. And before you make a choice, you need to be able to inform yourself. So my question is actually quite simple. I hope the answer is not, but what are you guys' thoughts on transparency towards the public from your field?
Shama, you want to answer?
I'm not sure that I have the answer to your question, but I mean, transparency can be a very broad domain. I think we need to be very clear in our sector on what aspects do we need to be transparent, and then maybe we can make headway. Is it on financial aspects? Is it on other accountability-related aspects? And then, what's expected in terms of transparency? So I'm not very clear, actually, in what context you're asking, but maybe somebody else can.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, transparency is quite broad, but I suspect you mean probably finances, right? How would organizations spend their money? I mean, because my organization, IRC, we do publish our financial reports every year, so it's out there in the public for anyone to see. It's and I guess most INGOs also do the same, so it's out there.
Okay, answer was short. Do you have maybe questions? And I think I'll have to stop here because of the next session. So we'll take a last question.
I'll try to also be short. My name is Clea Khan. I'm a consultant. Thank you very much. It's a really interesting discussion. And at the risk of making more of a statement than a question, I'll try not to do too much of that. But I do want to pick up on a couple of things. One is this question of humanity. I think it's really important because that's really what accountability is based on, is this core principle of humanity. And it shouldn't be a tick box exercise. It should be something that is tied to treatment of people as people, because they're not necessarily clients or beneficiaries, but because they are people in need. And so bringing it back to that core, I think, is quite important. And I also wanted to pick up on this question of who the money is given to and where that accountability is. Because I was previously working with the donor. And I think it's important to remember that the money that is entrusted to humanitarian organizations, whether it's by individual donors or by institutional donors, is not given to humanitarian organizations. It is given for the benefit of the people who receive the assistance. And we are entrusted with the responsibility of using it in their interest. So the accountability, we do have an accountability. It's not our money. And that accountability is really sort of sitting in that middle place. So it's obviously in both directions, but I think it is important to rethink about whose money that is. We're just a conduit, really. And I guess the last thing is just and it's a bit of a question, because we talk about the different parts of society, and it's a bit to challenge this idea that local organizations are necessarily more accountable, in the same way that the organizations that work in my community are not necessarily more accountable to me, just because they are, based in London or in Britain. And to emphasize again and maybe ask a question about how we factor in class, which came up this morning, and the stratifications in terms of socioeconomic stratifications, and how we take that into account when we talk about accountability.
Thank you. That's almost the final comment. I don't know if you want to react and make a final comment with this comment.
Yeah, sure. I'll pick on the last one on class. Absolutely. So one of the things that we, strongly recommend is to do our context analysis, proper analysis, and part of that is understanding the social structure in the places that we work in. So if you take Somalia, for example, we know that it's a very clan-based society, and you do have minority clans, living in areas that are dominated by majority clans. If you don't have that basic understanding, you're going to run into serious problems. I also had an experience way back in South Sudan where we were working with two local partners, one in a Dinka state and one in a Noe state, and somehow someone did not do their context analysis, and we're going to give the Noe state to a Dinka organization, and and the other way around. And we noticed during the design workshop, there was a lot of disagreement between both sides. So during lunch, I tried to investigate what was happening, and I discovered that we were trying to give a Dinka local partner a state that is predominantly Noe, and we're trying to give the Noe a state that is predominantly Dinka, and that's not going to work. So it's very important to understand the social structure in the places where we work, definitely.
Okay. Whoops. Do you want to have a last comment, and we'll finish our session?
Just to say that accountability is not a tick box exercise that needs resources, engagement, commitment, and it's long. That will touch the culture. We need to change our culture. That is a very big issue. It's not. We don't refer to it as a tick box exercise. Just what I want to say.
Thank you. So thank you very much. I invite you to enhance your soft skills and make them strong, and bring leadership. If this issue is very important for you, at least it has to be brought up to everywhere where you're working at. So thank you very much from your part, and we'll be hearing the last end of the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody.